Poland sounds alarm as Putin allies suggest Wagner will invade NATO country. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki warned on Saturday that the Wagner Group could be planning a hybrid attack against his country after the paramilitary organization moved more than 100 troops near the Suwałki Gap. Tensions between Poland and the Wagner Group have grown in recent weeks amid growing concerns about a looming invasion that began after the organization, which for months fought alongside Russian troops in the invasion of Ukraine, was expelled to Belarus following an attempted mutiny against military leadership in Moscow over its floundering invasion of the Eastern European country. The Wagner Group's presence in Belarus has fueled concerns that it could invade Poland to seize control of the Suwałki Gap, a small but critical corridor located along Poland's northeastern border that separates Russia from the exclave Kaliningrad. Should the Wagner Group and Russia take control over the gap, they would isolate the Baltic states from the rest of Europe, potentially allowing Moscow to exert greater influence over these nations. Morawiecki said on Saturday that Polish intelligence suggested that more than 100 Wagner troops had been moved toward the border, warning that the situation is becoming even more dangerous, according to a report from Ukrainian news outlet Ukrainska Pravda. This is definitely a step towards a further hybrid attack on Polish territory, Morawiecki said. They are likely to be disguised as Belarusian border guards and will help illegal immigrants enter Polish territory, destabilize Poland, but they are also likely to try to enter Polish territory posing as illegal immigrants, which creates additional risks. A spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State told Newsweek in a statement on Saturday that officials are aware that some Wagner fighters are in Belarus and are monitoring the situation. The spokesperson added that the United States remains committed to defending every inch of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, territory. Poland is a member state of NATO, meaning any attack against it would be treated as an attack against the entire military alliance, per Article 5 of its founding treaty. This means it would likely draw a military response from the US and much of Europe. The arrival of Prigozhin and Wagner forces in Belarus is another example of Lukashenko ceding further control and decision-making to the Kremlin, contrary to the interests and wishes of the Belarusian people, the Department of State said in its statement. We continue to look closely at the actions Wagner forces take that are against the interests of the countries where they operate, and we will continue to take actions to hold them accountable. Meanwhile, Olga Skabayeva, host of Russian state TV's 60 Minutes, also suggested during a recent program that the Wagner Group could attack Poland. Pro-Western monitoring groups report that the 12th convoy of Wagner PMC has already arrived in Belarus. According to them, the new convoy includes at least 50 vehicles, armored vehicles, buses, trucks, pickup trucks, petrol tankers, and even an excavator. The last one probably will be needed to tear down the fence, which Warsaw has built on the Belarusian-Polish border, she said. Newsweek reached out to the Polish Ministry of National Defense for comment. Poland's warning follows weeks of growing tensions with Russia. Morawiecki's latest warning follows weeks of growing tensions between Russia and Poland. Earlier this month, Poland transferred at least 1,000 troops to its border with Belarus amid concerns the Wagner Group's presence in the country could have a destabilizing effect on the region. Russian President Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, responded to Poland's concerns, saying, without evidence, that Poland appears to want to take control of its alleged historic lands. He added that Poland wanted to take a good chunk of Ukraine and was also dreaming of Belarusian lands, Politico reported. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a key ally to Putin who brokered a deal with Yevgeny Prigozhin, the paramilitary group's leader and founder, to end the Wagner rebellion, said last Sunday that the group wants to march on Poland. We began to be bothered by the PMC Wagner, asking to go to the west. Allow us. I said, why do you want to go to the west there? And quietly, we're in control of what is happening. Well, we'll go on a tour to Warsaw and Rzeszów, the Belarusian president said during a meeting with Putin, referring to the Polish capital, Warsaw, a key military hub for the country, Rzeszów. Ukraine war maps detail counteroffensive as Kyiv ups fighting on two fronts. An increase in fighting in two southern sectors of Ukraine has been reported as maps show the progress of Ukraine's counteroffensive, which is nearly 2 months old. Kyiv started the push to retake Russian-occupied territory around June 4, although analysts, world leaders and Ukrainian officials have said that it was going slower than expected. However, it seems that the counteroffensive has entered a new phase. Citing Pentagon sources, the New York Times reported on Wednesday that Kyiv was committing much of its reserves to a large-scale attack on the sector of the front line south of Orikhiv in Zaporizhia Oblast. Unverified social media videos show Ukrainian vehicles reaching the first set of Russia's heavily fortified defenses in the region. British defense officials said on Saturday that there had been a spike in hostilities over the last 48 hours near the village of Robotyne, south of Orikhiv, the responsibility of Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army. The Institute for the Study of War has provided daily maps along with its updates which graphicize the state of the conflict on the ground. On Friday, its map of the control of terrain around Robotyne said geolocated footage showed that Russian forces were exerting less control north and east of the settlement as of Thursday. The ISW noted Russian military bloggers saying Moscow's forces had repelled Ukrainian ground attacks near Robotyne and two other settlements south of Kyiv. Around 50 miles to the east, Ukrainian forces defeated the 247th Guards Air Assault (VDV) Regiment, part of the Russian airborne forces, to capture the village of Staromayorsk, in a gain that was touted by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Meanwhile, in the north, other Russian VDV units continued their offensive operations in the Serebryansk forest, west of Kreminna, in the Luhansk Oblast but have achieved little ground, according to the UK Ministry of Defence. The ISW map shows that Russian units had captured the settlement of Novoryhorovka and had crossed the Zarabets River. Further south, Kyiv said that the counteroffensive on the northern and southern flanks of Bakhmut was continuing. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said on Thursday that Kyiv's forces continued in advance along the south of Donetsk city fiercely fought over for months. Ukrainian forces led by the 3rd Assault Brigade are said to be closing in on the capture of the key settlement of Klishchiivka, the Kyiv Independent reported. Military analyst Rob Lee told the publication that the counteroffensive would continue for a while. I think we will see Ukraine eventually going back to that attritional approach with infantry assaults, going into August or maybe September, he told the outlet. It comes as the Russian-installed governor of Kherson Oblast, Volodymyr Saldo, said on Saturday that Ukrainian forces had attacked with cruise missiles the railway between Hachesk, in the region, and Jankoy in occupied Crimea overnight on Friday. Saldo said Ukraine had fired 12 long-range Storm Shadow missiles, and that Russian air defense downed all of them. The Russian Defense Ministry said on Saturday its air defenses had downed 7 Storm Shadow missiles over the past. Most Republicans back Ukraine military aid despite high-profile anger poll. A majority of Republican voters back continued U.S. aid for Ukraine, a poll has found. The nationwide survey conducted by the University of Maryland's Program for Public Consultation, PPC, comes as some prominent Republicans argue that Washington's support for Kyiv is not in the interests of the U.S., which is the biggest donor of equipment and resources to Ukraine. Kyiv has said it will not start negotiations with Moscow until it commits to withdrawing all its forces from Ukraine. Some members of Congress and foreign policy leaders have proposed that the U.S. pressure Ukraine to start peace talks without this precondition. Right-wing GOP lawmakers Matt Gaetz, RFL, Andrew Ogle, RTN, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, RGA, have tabled amendments to cut or curtail security assistance for Ukraine, although they failed. American help for Ukraine will likely remain a topic on the election campaign trail. Among the GOP presidential contenders, only former Vice President Mike Pence, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and Senator Tim Scott, SC, who all polled in single digits, have argued that helping Ukraine is in the U.S. interest. However, the poll of 2,445 voters found that 55% of Republican voters in fact backed American aid to Ukraine. The University of Maryland said that respondents were briefed on the history of Ukraine-Russia relations, the lead-up to the war, and were given details, proposals, and evaluated arguments for and against each before making their final recommendation. The survey found that 87% of Democrats and 58% of independents supported the U.S. continuing to provide military aid to Ukraine, including military equipment, ammunition, training, and intelligence. The pollster said that the sample was large enough to get a snapshot of attitudes in very Republican and very Democratic districts. There was 71% who agreed with continued American support of Ukraine in both very red and very blue districts. Meanwhile, across voters of all persuasions, 69% of respondents said they backed continued American support for Kyiv to fight against Russian aggression. While Republicans and independents are responsive to the arguments that the Europeans should take care of the problem, and that the nuclear risks are high, in the end they come out in favor of U.S. involvement, Stephen Cole, director of PPC, told Newsweek in a statement. Donald Trump has said on numerous occasions that he could end the war between Russia and Ukraine within 24 hours, and in an interview with Fox News on July 16 he said he would threaten further support for Ukraine if Vladimir Putin refused to make a deal with Kyiv. Recent exclusive polling conducted for Newsweek by Redfield and Wilton Strategies found that 43% of Trump voters believe the U.S. has provided too much support to Ukraine. According to the poll, 20% felt it was too little, 20% said it was about right, and 17% answered don't know. The survey, conducted on July 15 and 16 among 1,500 registered voters, also found that 41% of Trump voters believe the U.S. should reconsider our levels of support as the war continues. In total, 20% believed U.S. support should stop immediately. The U.S. has so far provided more than $75 billion worth of aid, including humanitarian, financial, and military support, although it has not met every request from Ukraine, particularly for more advanced weaponry. Last month, the Biden administration changed its position on U.S. fighter jets, allowing NATO allies to send U.S.-made aircraft like the F-16 to Ukraine. The University of Maryland survey, conducted between June 15 and June 28 with a margin of error of 2%, found a bipartisan majority of 73% approved of this move. Among these were 63% of Republicans, 86% of Democrats, and 64% of independents.